Hello, Dr. John Kavanaugh here, your instructor, also Senator John Kavanaugh. And this week's roundtable discussion are with another group of players here at the Capitol, and these are lobbyists. And we have four of the more well-known and effective lobbyists that inhabit these chambers. I have Kirsten Berlini, Nick Ponder, Marilyn Rodriguez, and Don Isaacson, kind of the dean of the group. So just like our usual format, we'll just kind of go around the table with the same question. So let's begin. Could you briefly tell us a little bit about yourself personally, and how did you wind up being a lobbyist? And how did you tell your mother?
She still doesn't understand. I ended up, during college, I did an internship with the governor's budget office. And that was before legislative hearings were televised. You couldn't watch them from your office. And so it was the way back. And so the governor's legislative director, since I was the budget geek and no one knew who I was, legislative director would sometimes send me to the Capitol to just sit in committee and take notes on bills the governor cared about. Because if the governor's staff showed up, everyone would know the governor cared about that bill, and sometimes you didn't want that. And so I was sort of the governor's office budget spy, and I'd go back and report. And then when I realized they actually pay people to do this, I thought, this is great. This is so much fun. So I absolutely loved it. I am a second generation Arizonan. So I grew up here. I love Arizona. I love working on public policy issues here in Arizona. And I have two standard schnauzers. So my kids have fur and love to hike, and that's me.
Okay. How about educationally? Did your education prep you for this, or how did you get down that road?
Absolutely. I ended up getting a Master's of Science in Economics, which really helped with budget, finance, fiscal policy, and then went on and got a PhD in organizational development. So just kind of for fun, because I love school.
All right, well.
I think the economics background is really, really helpful, or has been really, really helpful in understanding public policy and the financial elements around those.
All right, well, thank you, Doctor. Nick Ponder.
Yeah, Nick Ponder. I'm originally from Ohio, went to the Ohio State University, graduated with a degree in international relations, focus on world economy and business. I thought I, at one point in time, was going to be in the Foreign Service or try and do something within the Foreign Service. Post-college led me out to New York City, worked there for 5 years doing pension stuff for the Fire Department Pension Bureau. And then around the subprime mortgage crisis, my wife got a job that moved us out here and started working for the pension system here. My route to becoming a lobbyist, I think, is probably one of the least circuitous routes. I was working for the pension system here. I knew all the laws, and I was their sort of key witness and testimony at Office of Administrative Hearing proceedings. When the lobbyist for the state retirement system left, the director came to me and asked if I would be the legislative liaison for the state pension system. First had to have an internal dialogue with myself with the word lobbyist and what that meant. Then ultimately agreed to do it. Did 4 years there, went to the League of Arizona Cities and Towns, did that for another 4 years, and now I'm with a private firm. So this is my 10th session, I believe it is, as a lobbyist, and very different than what I originally thought it would be, but enjoyable.
All right. Marilyn Rodriguez.
I am a fifth generation Arizonan. I know. I love the state too. I get it. I totally see you. And I became a lobbyist by accident. Complete accident. I went to school initially. It was the first in my family to go to college, so I had to get a scholarship. And so I went on music performance. I was a percussionist, classically trained, and that's where I started my college career, but I did not want to be a professional musician. So I started taking courses and more just fell in love with public policy, political science, the idea that one individual, could impact the world around me through advocacy and democracy. And I just started applying for internships left and right. It wasn't until 3 days after I graduated that a lobbying firm in town called me. And I remember the job posting, it basically said, like, government relations firm pays money. At that point, I was waiting tables to get through. And I took the job and had never visited the Capitol before, despite, matriculating through Mesa Public Schools and living here my whole life. And for 3 months, just watched some of the most amazing, educated, well-intended people advocate for clients and do so in a manner that was just, I ended up graduating from Arizona State University with a degree in political science, a minor in public policy and public administration. And there wasn't a single time that I can remember a professor talking us through lobbying or the lobbying community or how this group of people exerts influence. And there's quite a bit. And so I just watched these individuals do this work and more just felt like this is my calling. And so one thing I will tell students night and day is advocate for yourself. Don't assume people know what you want out of your job or role. And so I sat the owner down and asked her for a job and to teach me everything she knows, and she said yes. And then fast forward, 7 years later, I'm taking Don out for drinks, asking him, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting my own firm." Don picked up the tab like a true gentleman, but gave me some sage advice, and I haven't looked back. I've started my firm, Creoso Partners, in 2017, and we're a progressive values-based organization. And that's the short of it.
For a minute, I was elated when you said you spent 3 months watching these talented, motivated people. I think we were talking about legislators.
Oh, never.
That's all right. It happens that way. Dawn Isaacson.
There's an adage that is, sometime you choose a job and sometime it chooses you. And I think for all of us, it's a job that none of us set out, took college courses in alignment with the ultimate job, but wound up in this position and thoroughly like it. I think in today's world, there's more of a specific pathway for young people in college to look at this as a career alternative and to take the courses and to do internships and others to wind up in this. But I think we're of an era that somehow you set out to do other things, but you wound up here. I grew up in northern Illinois, went to undergrad in Illinois, and came out to ASU Law School. I had one course in all of law school on legislation, and I never intended to ever use that course. I don't think it was on the bar exam. I took every tax course, intending to be a tax lawyer. And when I got out, I wrote contracts for about a year and a half, and then applied to the Attorney General's office for a relevant position there. And they said, "We're not hiring right now, but the legislature is looking for a rules lawyer." I didn't know what that was, but I applied to the House of Representatives, and I was hired as a rules lawyer, I think a week before session started. So I had a week's of prep time, really only 4 days, because the first day I moved desks. I was employed by the janitorial staff to assist them. But I had 6 great years at the House of Representatives, including a rules attorney, which is everything in the process comes across your desk. So you quickly, it's a fire hose role, and you quickly become acclimated to the legislature. I became majority counsel after that for the Republicans, and they added in the duties of director of research as well. So I think I had, in the buffet of the legislature, I think I sampled it all. And then I left, never intending to do this. I said, this is a wonderful place to work, but I want to go out and do a traditional private practice, and I did. I affiliated with a judge coming off the bench and did a little bit of everything. Traffic tickets, wills, divorces, the whole mix. And after I was out 4 or 5 years, several groups came to me. The police were one, a pest control group was another, and said, "Well, someone referred us to you, and would you like to do some legislative work?" I said, "Sure." And at that point in my life, anything that paid the bills, that anything came in the door, I would take. So I did that in that vein. And I enjoyed it very much, but it was still only a part-time part of what I did. And then several big clients retained us, and kind of the die was cast at that point. And so over the period of maybe 10 years, my practice converted from a traditional law practice to legislative and administrative law, and never looked back.
Now, well, let me pop over to Nick real quick, because we both have a similar start in terms of government. I mean, this schnout has been in the government trough my entire life, with the exception of some summer jobs in high school as a cashier in a department store. But I've always liked the security of a government job, government benefits, pension, what have you. So you started out in a government job, right? You were doing with the pension system, and then you went to kind of a semi-government job, right? Because you got, I assume you were full-time with the League of Cities and Towns?
That's correct.
And while they're a private group, they represent government, but you had a steady salary, you had benefits and everything, and then you made the jump to like your own lobbyist type thing.
Yeah.
So from my standpoint, I would be like totally terrified, not knowing where my next dollar was come from. So, but that seems to be the case with most lobbyists. So how do you, how would you allay the fears of somebody like me who wanted to be a lobbyist but preferred the security?
So I would actually defer to what Marilyn said, which is be your own best advocate. I mean, the fortunate thing, I think, for me is, I tried never to take anything for granted and, put my best foot forward all the time. Fortunately, never had the need to actually look for a job and had people looking for me, which is great. But the risk of leaving something where you're comfortable first happened with when I was working with the state retirement system. I could have done that job forever and been comfortable, but wouldn't have challenged myself, wouldn't have learned new things, wouldn't have, I think, grown. And so when I had the opportunity to go to the league and represent a whole separate set of interests, they actually first approached me just to be their pension policy analyst. And my thought process was that's a very narrow niche, and I don't want to do just that niche forever. So my prerequisite in going over there was I want to work on other issues. So they originally put me on tax issues because you deal with numbers when you do pension stuff, and you deal with numbers when you do tax stuff, and just always looking for that next opportunity to learn more. And so I took a risk there, and it paid off. And so when the additional opportunity to sort of take a risk and bet on myself came, I jumped at it, and fortunately haven't had the need to look back and reanalyze that decision.
Right. Kristen, so did you begin with a full-time job as a lobbyist with somebody, or did you also just jump into the private sector?
No, when I left the governor's office, I went to work for a lobbying firm. And so I had some good experience. I had some good mentors, built-in set of clients. That wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility was to do the legislative work. And then I left that firm and went to another firm because that firm focused solely on state legislative work. The second firm I went to focused on federal, state, and local. And like Nick said, I really wanted to grow my understanding of government at all levels and be able to interact in all levels of public policy making. I think it was a really important thing to learn. The challenge that I had, and the reason that I ended up making the break and going out on my own, was that we had partners in the firm that would bring in clients, which is great, unless your lead lobbyist has real philosophical issues with representing a particular client. And so I absolutely back to Marilyn and advocate for yourself, but also be true to yourself. And I always feel like I'm a better lobbyist. I know I'm a better lobbyist when I actually believe in my client, and I get to know my client enough to know that I can speak to a legislator with authority about the great things this client does, and I can feel good about that. And so that's why I took the plunge. And it was me and a laptop and a cell phone, working out of the bedroom in my house, wondering where I was going to find clients, and clients that I had worked with before, actually at both of the two firms I had worked with before, found me. And so within a week I had 2 clients signed, and and it went up from there. But it was absolutely terrifying.
But my worst nightmare, I would be curled up in the fetal position every night. So Marilyn, you recently started your own firm, but before that, were you with a company? How did your transition go?
Yeah, so I was with a corporate firm here in town, a large one, and I swear all I remember from the internship posting was government relations firm pays money internship. And yeah, from there I worked my way up. That was 2011 was my first year with them. 2013 I was made into a full-time lobbyist, and I got some really good advice from a colleague at the previous firm that, you know, lobbyists are not great teachers. The best thing that you can do is go down to the Capitol and just be around, and they will give you things to do. And boy, was that true. And I think, you know, I want to affirm a few things. Working your ass off, you have to. There are going to be some nights where you're in the fetal position. It's scary, and following your instinct and your guts on where you feel like you need to go is what got me to a place where in 2017, I thanked the people I had worked with for so long, continue to affirm that I am standing on their shoulders. But I found a need that I wanted to fill, and I was sick of waiting for someone else to do it. There are a lot of progressive organizations that go without representation at this legislature or have to navigate it by themselves. And I knew I was taking a risk. But I've been poor before. Let's do this. Let's go. I wanted to do this. I figured I could go back to waiting tables if it all fell apart. But similarly, within a week or two, I was signing clients that were coming to me. And now we're at our full strength. We're a staff of 11. And I think, you know, I worked really hard. I'm also really privileged to have been given the opportunity. That's not lost on me. And would just say that if you are given that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take a chance on yourself, do it. What's the worst that could happen?
Poverty, eviction.
Yes, but that certainly is the potential, you know, kind of other side of this coin. But that's really it. That's how I got here.
Right. Well, Dawn, you already touched on this a little bit, so you can expound on it, but let me get into the next question also. So, like, how do you get clients? I mean, it sounds like they're coming to you. Is it that easy? Should I just, get rid of my $24,000 a year job and become wealthy?
Well, on the first point, I just emphasize a little bit. I had gone into private practice and never looked back, never intending to do legislative work. I had a really good experience in my 6 years as a staffer. Met a lot of great people, but it was just something I wanted to do something else, and so I did that. And we had clients come to us and say, you know, we'd like you to represent us at the legislature, and it was part of my law practice. So I did everything else, plus I did that, and then we had a couple big clients that came to the firm for my representation: State Farm, Central Arizona Project, Sprint, and others, and that just kind of took me out of the ability to do other work because of the size and the expectation of those clients. And so I pretty quickly, when that started to happen, finished converting to legislative and administrative law. As far as clients, I like everyone else here, I've been fortunate. We had people come to us, and now I kind of have a full plate where there's only 4 of us, 2 lobbyists and 2 administrative people that work with us. And then our MO is to subcontract with other lobbyists if we need more capacity. So we have the good fortune of kind of having a full plate, and we are selective about what else we take on. But if you work hard and you're good at what you do, people are going to come knocking on your door. And that's, I think that we hear that from everyone. Mm-hmm.
And Marilyn, you kind of already answered the question by saying that you decided to pick out a niche, progressive organizations. There was a dearth of people there, and that kind of was a magnet thing. But did you do anything else? I mean, did you send out little like flyers? Did you call people?
No, your reputation. So something I talk about a lot is I wish there was in some ways, I understand that it's a First Amendment right to come to this place and advocate. But as a lobbyist, you are empowered to speak on so many others' behalf, and I think that carries a lot of responsibility. And some states require lobbyists to have some kind of certification, or there is at least something in place so that if you act unethically, there's a different ramification for you that is not quite the same as just a regular person coming here of their own accord. But at a minimum, even without that, in a state like Arizona, the Wild West of lobbying laws, your reputation is really that kind of iron law. Like if you are a liar, if you deceive, cheat, if you don't do a good job, people around here find out, they talk, they don't hire you, right? You're not recommended for positions. That word gets out. And so your reputation is really so important, and it's all you have. And it is why certain lobbyists don't ever have to go out and get and send out flyers. You said put flyers on cars out in the parking lot. And certainly that comes again with a little bit of luck. But if people hear, or the word gets around that you do a really good job on your client's behalf, you're going to start to get more contracts. At the previous firm, this was the same thing. I never saw, and this was a corporate firm, I never saw them go out and pitch for business. If anything, clients would come in. I will never forget this, and say, hey, I saw you worked for this major tech company. And in other states, we've found that lobbyists that work for this major tech company do a really good job. And so we just want to hire you. We don't want to contract with anyone else. So your book of business can also be a great, I think, advertisement or representation of what people can expect out of you.
So, Nick, do you think it was all the work you did with the League of Cities, which gave you a lot of exposure because you had these hot, short-term rentals? I mean, you had some major issues there. Do you think that's what helped you become the magnet once you went out, or did you do flyers?
Did not do flyers. Like I said, I've been fortunate enough to be recruited to jobs. I will say I completely agree with Marilyn. From my perspective, there's nothing more valuable than your own personal brand. And, the more ethically that you operate, the more honest that you operate with data and facts and analysis, I think the better off you're going to be and the more likely people are going to want to use you. So I think that your reputation is the most important thing. I've been in a private firm for the least amount of time of, I think, everybody here, just a little over 2 years now. Fortunately, when I left, my prior client, the League of Arizona Cities and Towns, wanted to retain me. And yeah, when you're there, you deal with every type of issue that you can possibly deal with, from short-term rentals to police enforcement to fire departments to, taxation. And those were a couple of the two big items that I worked on were tax related that brought, I think, a level of notoriety and trust in being able to understand complex issues to now that I've moved over, I'm dealing with probably one of the other larger issues in the state, which is water. So I think that's how it happened for me.
You dabble in housing, I noticed.
Well, that's the league side of things. That's the city side of things. Right. Yes, but cities and water. Yes.
And Kristen, do you think your early association with the companies is what let you pop off? If somebody wanted to start doing this, would you suggest that they start working for a company or a law firm to?
I would, and largely because this is the type of business you have to live to truly understand. But being in a firm and working with people who understand the business and know the business, that mentorship is critical for you to really understand what lobbying means, how it works. We've seen legislators who come out of the legislature, as you've mentioned, and want to become lobbyists, and very few of them make good lobbyists. And the reason is, when legislators ask lobbyists for information, we give you lots of information. The thing a lot of legislators don't think about is where that information came from. Maryland's, midnight.
We thought you made it up.
Trail off, yeah. Working your trail off, trying to get answers to questions and trying to make sure that you're educated in the issues. We do have, fortunately, the two initial clients that I got were clients from the other two law firms or lobbying firms that I had worked with, but referrals are the main source of our work. A few years ago, so I started my firm in, dating myself so terribly, in 2000, and I brought a partner on in 2012, and we changed my firm was KRB Consulting, which are my initials, and my new business partner wanted to change the name, and I couldn't imagine why. But we started Pivotal in 2012, and when he came in, he brought a whole different skill set and a whole different set of contacts and potential clients in the land use arena. And so, we've grown some just based on what expertise we have within our firm.
And your relationship with other lobbyists too. If
Absolutely.
you can't take on a client yourself, but you've worked well with somebody on another lobbyist on a similar issue, you might direct that client to them.
Well, before we go to the next question, I should interject a little of my instruction in here to my students. What I always remember in terms of public-private sector employment is a scene from the movie Ghostbusters, the first Ghostbusters movie, where was it Murray and Aykroyd had just been fired from their job as bogus sham paranormal researchers at Columbia University. And they both got fired because the university realized that they were jokes. And they're in Central Park, and Murray says to Aykroyd, we'll survive. We can go out on our own. We'll open up our own paranormal, detection service, and we'll make a lot of money. And Aykroyd looks at him and says, "You don't understand. You have never worked in the private sector. They expect you to produce." That is a fear of many of us in the public sector. All right, so we're in session generally January, and we usually finish around May, right? Give or take a month. So like June 1st, you guys just go on vacation for 6 months? How does that work?
Wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't that?
Well, I will say, I'll start off. No, generally. All your clients want sort of a wrap-up of what the session was and how it went and expectations going forward. But I will say, a few years ago, we were negotiating a large tax item, a flat tax item, and at that point in time, I said, as soon as this legislative session, I said to my boss, we resolved it, fortunately, on behalf of my client. I said, I'm disappearing for a month. It's kind of like Jay Peterman. I was going to be in Cambodia for a month from Seinfeld because I did not want to see anybody or deal with anything related to the Capitol. So there have been times when I've done that, but generally speaking, absolutely not. I think your clients want that update and try and provide them information on the session, but also looking ahead to next session. I mean, one of my clients right now is already having conversations about what they're looking for the 2025 session, and we're still not maybe 2/3 of the way done with the 24 session. So,
Okay.
Yeah, that's very common. You start talking about next year and what's possible, but then also making sure that anything that you either won in a legislative fight, whether it's the budget or a bill, or lost, keeping an eye on those things. Like, for instance, there was a massive amount of money that went into the Housing Trust Fund in the budget last year, and we have several clients interested in ensuring not just that money got to the Housing Trust Fund, but that it is going out to people who really need it in communities that are desperately in need of rent money, first-time home buyers, et cetera. And so going to the agency, the Department of Housing, and continuing that advocacy to say, hey, I want you to meet with some communities that could really benefit from these dollars and provide some input on how they're doled out. It's that at every level, depending on the legislative session. It's always different. But to Nick's point, we're already talking about 2025 legislation on stuff that died.
Well, I was gonna say, save your notes on my bills, because in 2 years when we have a Republican governor, and the words of Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'll be back. Related to that, I remember you said something to me a few weeks ago about the way you do your job, and I think you mentioned that you were really, this is before the session, you said you were really busy because you have to pour through all these bills to make sure that something that's going to harm your client isn't buried somewhere. Is that part of the...
That's definitely a part. Probably contrary to perception, it is a 12-month job, and you're doing different things in different months. I want to build off the summer. We drill into our our clients, they should be patient, clients that the day after the session ends here, the next day the next session begins. And so you have to think in terms, okay, the session has begun, what do I do now? And that's when you have extensive discussions about what to do, priorities, etc., and then you start to do research. So that fills the interim, plus fundraisers. We all participate in the public fundraising process to support legislative candidates.
God bless you.
Yes, God. Yes. Amen. And that takes time. There are individual fundraising events. There's collective fundraising events. So, and a certain number of clients want to be introduced to legislators in those settings. So that requires quite a bit of time and management as well. Research. I would say by September of the interim, you are now meeting legislators and laying the groundwork for what you want in January. If you don't in September, it's almost a lost cause. You have to use those months to lay the groundwork for the session. And then to the point that you raised about bills, 1,700 bills coming in, and like everyone else here, every night of introduction, you're looking through every one of them to see what the impact is on your client. If you have any question, they get sent out to your clients with a request for a quick review and response, and then that sets your course on whether you're going to intervene pro or con or monitor. So that is a very intensive time when my guess is this group here doesn't go home before 10 o'clock because until the bill introduction period is done, you're pouring through that. It's a 12-month job.
And Kristen, some of these bills are unbelievably complicated, particularly when you start getting into, the what I call the snooze committees, like finance, So,
Maybe appropriate.
I mean, you obviously, your college, your background is limited to a certain area, but these bills are in like one reason why I like the legislature more than the town council is that town councils got really repetitive after a few years. It's the same, but this is like A to Z. Right. So what happens when, a complicated bill that you're not that familiar with? I mean, do you have the client prep you? Do you go to Google? How do you do that?
All of the above. All of the above. Very complicated pieces of legislation come across your desk. As Don mentioned, if there's any question, send it out to the client. But legislation is written differently than documents a client's used to reading. So part of what we as lobbyists do is that translation between government speak, language and statute, and on the ground, what does this really do? So sending it out to your client isn't always going to be your best bet, depending on the sophistication of the client. But also talking to colleagues, looking for experts in the area. If it's a complicated water issue, contacting the Department of Water Resources, talking to the state agencies, talking to their legislative liaisons, talking to other people who have experience in an area. And then the longer you do this, the wider your breadth of understanding gets, right? So you spend a lot of time in the interim learning as much as you can about your clients and working and as much as you can about legislators who would like to support their issues, but then also Google search. Has this happened in another state? Can I find a sample? Can I find sample talking points? I think all of us probably have some connection with lobbyists in other states just because we've worked for same national clients, those kinds of things. So we use all of those resources to get as educated on the issue as we possibly can. And a lot of that education happens during the interim. So again, back to that 12-month period, we do get nice vacations in the summer because we have worked like crazy people through the session. But you're so busy during legislative session, And you're drinking from fire hoses, we're drinking from fire hoses. But in September or October, that's a great time to get legislators out to see if a client got money out of the housing trust fund in order to build affordable housing. Come out and take a look at the affordable housing. Let's show you what we did with those appropriations. Let's show you why this client is important or this company is important to the state. So all of those things happen in the interim.
Nick, similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately or fortunately, I'm the type of person that kind of tries to pour myself into a particular subject area. When I did city lobbying, the thing with cities in Arizona, obviously they say whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting, right? I mean, the cities never did water. Anytime we saw a water bill, we set it aside and let the individual cities battle those out. So when I was hired to come on and deal with a water client, the first reaction was, I know nothing about water, because I just completely set it aside. And so I had to pour myself into that and find a mentor that helped guide me through the policies on water. I feel comfortable about that, but never to the extent where I don't rely on somebody else for a little bit of help, because there's always somebody who's been doing it a little bit longer and maybe a little bit better that can help you guide, and you're just supposed to be the vehicle for their voice, right? And so that's what I've always tried to do. But I think also as you look through a bill, you can also let your past sort of guide how you view the lens in which you view a particular bill. Every word matters in legislation. The difference between an or and an and can be exponential. And so you have to, this is a job that you can't do while other things are on in the background at home, right? You have to focus in on every single line, every single word in a particular bill, because it could have an inverse impact to what was originally intended. So, and I think that's how we focus on it.
Don, would you rather kill a bill or promote it? What's easier?
Well, I think killing a bill is customarily thought of to be easier. I enjoy promoting a bill. If there's something that really gets to my interest, I enjoy the advocacy and identifying a strategy for the advocacy and networking to find supporters, identifying objections and dealing with those objections by fact or amendment. And so for me, the thrill of the ride, if there is one, it's that. It's taking this complex issue and how am I going to get it to the finish line. That's probably the most fun that I would say that's in the process. Killing is a different set of efforts. It is identifying all the negative and seeding the negative everywhere you can. It's not as, while there's a strategy involved, it's harder to pass a bill. It requires kind of thinking or looking past the next hill, and to me that's kind of where the adrenaline rush is.
When you kill a bill, do you worry about alienating legislators who might, in the future, you might have to deal with? Not that I'm referring to the 15 bills of mine that you've killed in the last 18 years.
Only several.
Who's counting?
It's business.
To me, that is, Marie and I take a position, you do the right thing and you let the consequences follow. And the right thing is supporting the client to the fullest extent the client deserves. So I have alienated legislators. There was a legislator from Prescott who wanted to reform police our overtime, et cetera. And she had a bill in regularly, and for the fraternal order police, we consistently killed it. And eventually she gave up. And for the entire rest of her legislative career, she never voted for anything that I was a part of. So, yes, but did I do the right thing? I did the right thing.
Life or death?
Well, killing bills is wonderful, and I love doing it. I do agree with Don that there's just something special about coming together around making something happen. Passing a bill is exponentially more difficult than killing a bill. I think you use similar skill sets, but I agree with Don. It's a different beast. That takes, I feel like it takes my whole brain to get to a point where I'm thinking through not just all the reasons why someone might like this change, but answers to all the reasons why someone might not. thinking through the universe of people that this impacts and whether they have the resources and capacity to help me have conversations with 90 people in the governor's office and potentially the agencies in their lobbies. And it's so much work, but it's so gratifying when you, at the end of the day, get that signature because you made that law and you worked hard to get there. And it wasn't, of course, just you. You probably made friends and enemies along the way. It was a journey, and it always is. There's no such thing as passing an easy bill. That does not exist. It's
Under gets them.
always challenging. But yeah, I was thinking about, you're talking about seating where you can on killing bills. In that bill review process that we're talking about, where we're poring over bills every night, I am absolutely texting Kristen, Don, like, hey, did you see this? You probably hate this too. Let's kill it. But yeah, you're spreading information, you're making friends. And we are a network where we support one another, of course, to benefit our clients' interests, but it's very much this mutual.
Sure. The conspiracy is quite widespread. Nick, what do you like to do?
So I've had more experience killing bills. It's not something I say with pride, to be honest with you, because I do agree that there is something special about being able to go and advocate for a bill and ultimately get that signature. But I also think that I'll put a plug, there's a book called Getting to Yes, which is all about the art of negotiation and talks about Egypt and Israel and the Sinai Peninsula and all that stuff and trying to figure out what is at the heart of people's desires. And there's often times where I think the expectation is from people on the other side that I would oppose a bill, but I found a way to get to yes on things, whether it's the Wayfair legislation in 2019 or the flat tax legislation in 2021, or we're working on housing legislation this year, and I'd like to get to yes on those things. The thing that, I think every one of us tries to do is see things through the lens of the counterpart, the counterparty, and trying to identify, maybe there's a point to be had here that you can concede on, as I think Don was pointing to, but also maybe there's points that you just have to remain firm on. So I don't prefer killing bills. I actually prefer on working them. I think I heard from Don years ago when I first started, I think, at the league, that don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think that's, sometimes the conversation you have to have with legislators is 70% of something is better than 100% of nothing. And let's try and figure out how we can get to yes.
Because there's also a euthanasia by study committee, but that's another issue.
Which is also fun. I think it really depends on the issue. There are some bills that are they're so potentially damaging to a particular industry or interest, and there's a lot of momentum behind them. And when you can stop that bill from happening, and you can kill that bill, that feels really good because you have done what your client needed you to do. Charging the hill on a new policy or a new proposal is always exciting and interesting and fun. But as Nick mentioned, I mean, we are a tight-knit community, and Don and I may be on opposite sides on an issue, battling it out, but we have a trusted relationship that has grown over the years, and we can sit down and try and figure out if there isn't a way for his client to get what they want and my client to get what they want, because that getting to yes is so critically important. And the relationships that the lobbyists have together, whether it's mentoring and helping someone in an issue area they're not that familiar with, or it's working to negotiate a win-win, or to get 70% instead of 100%. But one of the things that we do with clients too that I wanted to mention, because I don't think it's something people think about generally when they think about lobbyists, we develop relationships with our clients such that they trust our expertise and opinions. And oftentimes a client will come in and say, I want a bill that does this. And I'll think, oh, I think there's going to be a lot of scorched earth around that. But if you really work with that client and try and figure out what the end goal is, oftentimes there's a way to approach it that is not so scorched earth, because we're going to be around a long time. We don't want to scorch earth with our lobbying colleagues or with legislators. We want to be solutions people versus just kill everything that we don't like or run things that are really going to step on a lot of toes.
You actually just mentioned something that you say, well, work around. And it just occurred to me, do you ever, like, say to a client, we'll never get a bill passed, but then go to some administrative agency and lobby for a regulation? Is that something which you do?
Yes.
Regulation, there are alternatives to legislation. I think we'd all say that. So, you know, in some cases, the response is regulation. In some cases, let's negotiate, let's meet with the agency and see if administratively they can move in this direction. And so I think any experienced lobbyist is going to look at the range of options, and it doesn't necessarily mean legislation.
Absolutely. I had experience recently under the previous administration where the Department of Revenue suddenly started reading into what, or they reinterpreted what a qualified charitable contribution organization means. And the new interpretation eliminated the abilities for English as a second language and GED groups to operate as not qualified charitable nonprofits. And they came to me and said, we want a bill. I said, well, you know, I think this administration would be horrified to learn that that's the interpretation. Let's talk to the Department of Revenue first. Let's talk to the administration. And through multiple conversations with staff, got to a resolution that did not require legislation. So I think that history too, and knowing at least the ethos of the administration or the lawmaker or the agency that you're trying to meet with can be really helpful, and seeing outcomes that didn't require a bill, just required a conversation about, well, did you mean this to be the outcome, and what resolution do we have in place to fix it?
Representing local governments, I think, you know, we obviously work with a ton of state agencies, so there was oftentimes, I wouldn't say that it's something as nefarious as like you couldn't get a bill passed so you go to the agency, but sometimes there just needs to be some clarification and understanding, like Marilyn said. But I want to piggyback on something that Kristen said, which is that there's a perception that lobbying only happens from us to the legislators, and it happens just as much from us to our own clients and to each other. I can't tell you how much internal lobbying that I have to do on virtually every issue just to get the client to yes, to then get the legislator to yes.
Interesting. Well, I like the comments about agencies, because my students may notice this certainly affirms the section of my book where I talk about the danger to the legislature from the administrative state. So. You're called lobbyists, and I guess the obvious reason is that conventional wisdom is that you hang out in lobbies trying to grab a quick elevator speech talk with a legislator. Now, I suspect, and you can confirm this, that I'm a little unusual in that for the last 18 years, I meet with everybody. A, I like the information. B, people got to earn a living, so yeah. So I'm sure you can go and you want to tell your client I met with the appropriations. Yeah, that's got to have a little bit of weight. So I'd like to help you out. But I even meet with these ladies from the American Friends Service Committee where I just confirm why they would never vote for me, but it's interesting to do. But I suspect that I am not like most legislators. I'm sure there's like a normal bell curve where some you'll never meet. We're going around, your experiences with trying to meet with legislators, is it frustrating? Do you have tricks? Do you feign a heart attack in an elevator? How's it?
Well, it's, post-COVID, I have found that it is harder to get meetings with legislators. There was a period of time they weren't here, legislature shut down, and we had a lot of new legislators come in. And so we didn't have the opportunity as lobbyists to develop relationships with some of these new legislators. And so there are a lot of them that don't really understand what we do or why it's important to meet with us. That's one of the challenges. And I've seen that grow over time, and then COVID was kind of a tipping point on that. But we've also got a number of legislators who get elected for whom lobbyist is a bad word. And they don't want to feel like they're being lobbied to do one thing or another, when the lion's share of what we do is educate and tell them about issues that, it's, as you said, it's A to Z down here. You can't be an expert on everything. But yeah, catching legislators in the hall, catching them after committee is adjourned before they leave. We walk them out to their cars, whatever
At
it
the gate,
takes.
though.
Right. Whatever it takes to get that few minutes, but really without an opportunity to develop a relationship with a legislator, it's much harder for legislators to trust what you're telling them or why it's important.
Sure. Well, one of the things I've always told legislators is that a good lobbyist will come in and say why you should vote for his or her bill, and then the really good ones will say, this is what my opponents will say, and this is why they're wrong.
I mean, yeah, so from what Kristen said, relationships is the most important thing. Now, that is harder because I think over the past 2 years, we have 47 of our 90 legislators that are new, somewhere in that neighborhood, because of just an immense amount of turnover over the last couple cycles. So that does make it more difficult to foster those relationships, but completely agree that having a relationship is the most important thing, which will allow you to just text a legislator and not have to take, a half an hour block in off of their calendar. But if you can, but getting into that meeting, from my perspective, and I found this with an old boss that I had, I always want to think of the top 10 questions that they're going to ask. And if they ask 3, fine, at least I was prepared for the other 7. And going into legislators is the same way, but then they might ask that 11th question that you didn't prepare for, and that lets you know for the next legislator what you need to be thinking about. So, but also to the point, I think there, in my work where I work with a lot of local governments, they have their own governmental affairs people, and sometimes they think that just a phone call to the office asking for a meeting is enough. And no, that's not enough. Going in after a particular committee where they were talking about a bill and stealing, 5 minutes of their time to talk about an item, or walking them out to the car, having a lunch or a dinner, those are all things that I think can be done and aren't always done.
Yeah.
My advocacy involves a little bit of a different approach in that I represent organizations that some lawmakers never want to meet. Ever.
A little over half of us.
Yeah. So it requires me to take my ego out of it and approach it in less of a traditional way, instead of being the one to meet with all the lawmakers, though I will request meetings and try to establish that rapport, and I will never meet with a lawmaker who I think in that conversation is I'm 100% sure their constituency and ideology are just completely inconsistent with what I'm asking them to do. So instead, we engage clients and allies in that similar policy space who are also impacted by that change. We'll look around us and say, well, if not us, then who? And so I actually spend a lot of time in meetings and on calls with people who care about the issue, but don't have the talking points and want to walk through it, need help prepping for that meeting with that lawmaker. They're willing to do it. They're going to get the meeting. And that lawmaker, more likely than not, cares more about their approach to the issue than my clients. And we get to the same end. So we spend, like you said about lobbying others, beyond lobbying members of the legislature, will often be educators and advocates to the organizations around us or the constituencies around us, trying to find someone who is also impacted by that issue, who has a unique voice that we think that lawmaker is more inclined to listen to and more inclined to connect to. Because you said something at the beginning of this, Kristen, that I think is totally true. Even if I got that meeting and I'm representing an organization that, we agree to disagree, is doing something that that I want to see an outcome for. If you aren't connecting with me, right, if I'm not finding a way to make it clear why you should care about this or why your constituents care about this, then I'm wasting both of our time. And so I always try to find that nexus between the lawmaker and what drives their incentives behind the vote. And if we can't find it, we're not going to request a meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, I might try to grab you and see if we can have a conversation if it comes down to it. But I mean, we know
Yeah.
on most of the issues that I work for, we know.
Don?
I think the meetings with legislators has become more important because a phenomena occurred, and I can't tell you when it was, but this 2-minute rule is, I think, awful, and particularly for the opening on any bill. So you could come up with a really complex bill. It's your bill, and it's got 10 moving parts, and you've got 2 minutes by the chairman's rule, to explain it. You can't do it. And so
John's referring to committee testimony.
committee testimony. And so what that does is force me, not force me, but requires that I then meet with everybody on the committee, knowing that I'm only to get 2 minutes for a minimal presentation. What makes that even more difficult is what Kristen alluded to, is during COVID, legislators were able to say, I'm not going to meet with you. And some of them carried that forward after COVID. And so that is difficult. And there is a group of legislators, House and Senate now, of a particular political bent that reinforce to each other, we don't meet with lobbyists on any subject because we're whatever, for whatever reason they don't. So it really puts on a premium for us to spend as much time as we can meeting with the legislators on a committee, particularly when we're trying to sell a bill. I don't know if you have all have the same experience.
I want to amen your comments about the 2 minute
Yes.
rule.
Yeah, in fact, I would like to put in that maybe we could all advocate for that. That's a horrible mistake. What used to occur is on any big bill, the league would come, they'd get an opening statement of maybe 10 minutes, and the opposition would get maybe 10 minutes. And so the committee would get the full the full side of it, and then other people would get a shorter amount of time. But
Yeah, if you have a 20-page bill that has, 5 or 6 different sections, and they're all equally as dense as the one that preceded it, you can never get
That's
through
a
that
good
in 2
point.
minutes.
I mean, sometimes I would, say the first couple of people get 3 minutes, and then after that we go down because everyone else is just repeating everything after that.
you could probably go to 1 minute after the first. It's kind of like an opening statement before a court. Is you're given a full time to kind of present the evidence and the facts, and the other side is given the equal. And then what follows after that, you're right, is
Then after 10, just give them 5 seconds to say ditto.
Well, and one of the things that 2 minute rule forces us to do as well is, for the legislator I get a meeting with that understands my position, they issued the bill, I'll give them a set of questions, or a couple legislators' questions, for them to ask me so I can continue to make some points because of that 2 minute rule. But it's not nearly as clear or concise as if I'd had 5 minutes to talk about it as opposed to 2.
Just kind of wrapping it up, one more question, and then you can add any closing comments you want. Obviously, some issues are so volatile, so emotional, that to be associated with them could seriously hamper your ability to relate to legislators later on. And I'm talking about like abortion, gun rights, stuff like that. Now, Marilyn, you've kind of
Live there.
given yourself you basically gone to, that's your niche. So, but I noticed I never really see you get up there. So are there certain issues that you who have not niched it just stay away from, like Dracula and garlic?
Yes.
I don't gotta say which ones, but yeah.
I mean, so when I represented the cities, very infrequently will we get drawn into gun issues. The one issue is that we would get drawn into, and I think you've been the sponsor a couple times,
Public buildings.
is mandating that municipalities allow carrying of weapons in public buildings, and that's always been a challenge for local governments. But generally speaking, it's, so whether it's those two and it's not sort of this a social issue, but water, again, when I was dealing with water for the cities, it was completely stay out of it, because it can be vitriolic.
That's why I carved out this niche. The previous firm, and everyone in this room probably has opinions about social issues, but taking them on means you're paying a cost of relationships with lawmakers. It just does. And so my clients don't expect me to have great relationships with everyone. They expect me to help them navigate to a certain end, to the extent it is possible.
You're like a Trekkie where no lobbyist has gone before.
If any of these individuals took on social issues right now, the rest of their client book would suffer as a result, very likely would suffer. all of my clients come on knowing that you have to be fully on board with the rest of the base, and you have to know too that I'm going to say something in committee that is pro-abortion, for instance, that might mean I can never meet with the chairperson ever again. My clients know this. They support what I am doing, but it requires them to have that lens when bringing us on, and they decide to when they decide to work for us. That is very different and apart from the skill set that corporate lobbyists might, use. And that's legitimate. That's totally valid. And the reason they're put in that position is not because they don't care. It's because lawmakers punish them for having, said what they said. And so that's the current environment we live in. I hope it changes one day, but that's why my business is thriving, is nobody else can take these clients on. The rest of their business would suffer.
So, go around, a little closing comment, closing piece of advice to the students or whatever.
Yeah, I think lobbying was, as you said at the beginning, nobody really at 5 when their kindergarten teacher says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" They didn't say lobbyist. But it is a very, very fulfilling profession. It is, I'm surrounded by really high quality people. It is an opportunity to learn and grow every day, to serve clients, to do what I believe is good work in the world, and to serve clients. So if any of your students have an interest, they really ought to come down to the Capitol. They can shadow legislators, see what it's like down here. They can shadow lobbyists,
Pages, interns.
interns, any of those opportunities. If you've got an interest, it's a fascinating place. No 2 days are alike. No 2 issues are alike. And it's really, really hard work, but it's a lot of fun.
Well, one thing that makes it really fascinating is that legislators have no bosses, or at least no bosses on site. I was a Port Authority cop for 20 years, and I was in the bus terminal in Times Square before Giuliani cleaned it up. And like a lot of kind of rough areas, the rules are kind of cast aside, and there's no chicken shit stuff, And I mean, literally, didn't do anything illegal or brutal or anything like that. But just crazy, funny, weird stuff. It was like working with a band of pirates. It was unbelievable. I just laughed my way through all those tours. And it's very similar here. I mean, legislators can pretty much do or say anything they want because they have no boss. And we got some real characters here. This is almost like being a Port Authority cop, with the guys I work with. So
you're probably the biggest joker of all the legislators. So, I sort of echo what Kristen said. Again, from my perspective, never thought that I would be in this profession. I think. As I mentioned when the very first question, I had to have this internal dialogue with myself about the term lobbyist and what does it mean, and do I want to do it because of all the connotations that came with it. Most important thing to me is sort of to be ethically driven. Again, as I said, integrity is probably my most important trait that I want to focus on. I love the job because it's like a chess match. It's you. And any good chess player, you have to think 3 to 5 moves ahead of what the opposition might be doing for you to be able to react to any one of those moves. And so it is probably the hardest job I've ever had, but also the most challenging and most fulfilling job that I've ever had. And so I would certainly encourage folks to think about it. Take a risk on yourself, be your own advocate, but also be open to the idea that you may not have all the answers, and that legislation comes for a reason, that people are bringing a perspective. And from both sides, I think as long as we can try and identify the other person's lens from which they're viewing things, we can actually negotiate good legislation every year.
And I'm glad you mentioned the analogy of a chess game, because as my students know, in the book I wrote for this course, I actually compare it to that, but I have an image of the 3-dimensional chess game.
Yes, exactly.
It's not it's not the linear one.
No.
You never know where it's coming from.
That's true.
There's nothing linear about this.
Yes, echo both of those sentiments. And would just say, because I meet with a lot of students who are very curious about the world of lobbying. It's this like sexy black box and you don't know how to get in. there are so many opportunities that I see open up where you can just get your foot in the door. If you are given the opportunity to work in the private sector for a nonprofit that has an advocacy arm, for a government agency that in their legislative department, take it. The churn here is so great. People are constantly moving up, moving out, moving in their roles. With the politics changing as much as they are, right? We saw an entire administration, change over.
Tell me about it.
So I would just say, like, if you can get that first job, the best thing that you can do is, one, be the best student, learn everything you can, but then everyone you meet, make friends, take them to coffee, pick their brain, think of everyone around you as a mentor. And eventually the path forward will start to make itself clearer and clearer. You'll be able to trust your instincts, and hopefully get a job doing this full time like we have the pleasure of doing.
To that point, I'm sure every one of us has probably helped a page or an assistant or somebody like that find a role that, and Don probably, and Kristen much more than us, but just get your foot in the door and find a way.
It is a wonderful job that I had no idea that existed, that puts me in the middle of a forum where 90 people have been elected to make the world better, and they bring their own background, their own personal philosophy and education into the ring to try to address issue by issue. And it is a wonderful spectator sport. And it's kind of bizarre because it's like watching a football game, and then at a certain point you climb over and you're part of the football game. But to me, it is incredible to watch the people with various backgrounds try to make the world better. And the best piece of result is where they pass you pass a comprehensive bill, whether it's water or housing, whatever, that brings all these philosophies together. As far as how you get into it, and I think if you want to get into it the right way, get a job at the legislature, get an internship or a job. You absorb the culture, you absorb the unwritten rules, the protocols, the respect. You find out whether this is for you or not, because it's not a job with where everything is laid out in detail. There's a whole lot of judgmental decisions, situational decisions every day, and it's important to get the culture before you jump into that. I think law school is a great prep. I'm sure there's others as well. I think my role as a rules lawyer, majority counsel, and director research were all foundational, gave me a head start, knew what to say, what not to say. And I guess I would say also, this is for persons. If you're not a people person, you're probably not going to fit down here. If you like to be isolated and poring over data and analyzing it, that's probably not for you to be down here.
JLBC.
That's JLBC.
There is a road,
But,
yes.
It is a community. It's a village. One of the bizarre features that exist here, I don't know if it exists in other settings, is, and I think of Barry Aarons because he's been around a long time. There are, at the same moment in time, I may be Barry's best ally on an issue in the foxhole, sharing the most full details on a strategy, and yet he's my worst enemy on another bill. He's an egg-sucking dog. I am using everything within my power to stop him on that, all at the same time. And I'm sure we all have experiences like that. You do as legislators as well.
Say we do with you, and to your question earlier about alienating legislators, when you have a diverse practice, it rarely happens because we may not agree on one issue, but I'm helping you on another issue, or we're working together on something else. So.
And by the way, to be an intern or a page, you have to be 18 years of age because we don't want to be convicted of contributing to the delinquency of minors. Actually, you can be under 18. I'm just kidding. All right, there you have it. Lobbyists, a fascinating, interesting career possibility that you might want to explore. Just don't tell mom. See you next class. Bye-bye.